to what is surely going to be the most fun panel of the event. Not that I've been to the other panels here, but a cannabis conference usually is and should be the most intriguing and fun part of any conference. Yes, guys? There you go. My name is Scott Greiper. I am the president of Viridian Capital Advisors. We are the first investment banking firm dedicated to this space, launched about 3 years ago. And it's been a wild ride for those of us who have been in this industry for a while. Wild not only in terms of watching the evolution of a market going from a $50 or $60 billion black market to now last year about $7 billion of that $50 billion of consumption was actually bought through a legal licensed grower, through a legal licensed dispensary. So when you do the math, I had never seen this in my career, there is no quantifying the demand side of this equation. The customer is already there. It's just a matter of getting states to move on legalization, enacting the requirements and the rules so you have a standard, consistent, regulated market, and it's moving from the dark to the light, really quite an interesting dynamic. I'm going to introduce these guys in a second. I just have two quick questions. Does anybody want to venture a guess? In the last 4 years, the growth in the number of public cannabis companies, I'll include North America, US and Canada. You guys don't count because you're public cannabis companies. Anybody want to venture a guess how many public cannabis companies there are in the US and Canada? 20.
50.
15?
50.
50.
80.
The number of public cannabis companies in the US and Canada, it's not The Price is Right, by the way. You can't bet one over.
You've gone over. Highest bidder.
So I heard 20, I heard 50. Anybody else? 80. This is the second time. Public cannabis company. This guy's stoned. We got to get him out of the room. Get the cane. So the answer is there's about 250 in the U.S. You win. There's a rolled joint in the back that has your name on it. And there's about 50 public Canadian cannabis, 300 public companies in this industry, which is pretty stark considering that 3 years ago, I think you, Derek Peterson from Terra, maybe 2 years ago, got the first S1 cleared through the SEC or among the first?
It feels like 14 years ago.
Okay.
3 might be accurate, yeah.
But literally, you guys, I believe, were the first company to get a registration statement through the SEC, which everybody thought was impossible because the SEC is a federal agency and this is federally illegal. So that was pretty amazing.
I was the only stupid one that applies.
I don't, no, I would say you had foresight.
I
So,
tell everybody.
okay, well, I don't believe that because you got it done. So with that, let me introduce our panelists, let them describe their companies. Derek Peterson from Terra, if I didn't mention, the first company to get a registration statement through the SEC. No small feat. Julius Kalsevich from Ianthus, and Todd Davis from Endexx, Tim Keogh from American. These are guys that are representing different segments of the industry. There's about 12 different business segments in this cannabis industry, from real estate to biotech to ag tech. So with that, I am going to ask each of you to introduce yourself. Oh, thank you. To introduce yourselves, and then I'll start peppering you with questions. Derek, why don't you start?
Can you guys hear me okay in the back? I hate microphones. Does this work okay?
Great.
All right, so I'm the CEO of Terra Tech. We're a bit of a kind of a diversified or bifurcated business. We have a traditional agricultural side. We operate 250,000 square feet of Dutch-style greenhouse in Belvedere, Jersey along the Delaware Water Gap. We grow regular stuff, herbs, everything Simon & Garfunkel sings about, butterhead lettuce. We do that under the brand name of Edible Garden, so if you spend any time in, I don't know, Fairways, D'Agostino, Stop and Shop, ShopRite, Walmart, Kroger's, Marshalls, we're in all those retailers. We're in about 2,000 stores in the Northeast and Midwest with that particular brand. We're looking forward to, New Jersey potentially fast-tracking with a new governor here in the not-too-distant future. So that's the ag side. On the cannabis side, we operate 4 retail dispensaries in the Nevada marketplace, 3 of them around the Las Vegas area, and then 1 of them up in Reno. We're building out 2 large-scale cultivation and extraction facilities in the state as well, 1 in Reno, 1 in the Las Vegas area. In California, we operate a fully integrated seed-to-sale facility up in Northern California and Oakland, where we grow, cultivate, extract, as well as have a high-volume retail facility. And then about 45 minutes south of Oakland in a city called San Leandro in between San Jose and Oakland, we won another permit in there. We're building out a new retail facility and an extraction facility. Should be open sometime in the summer. So that's the rough footprint of the company.
Okay. Julius Kalsovich from Ianthus Capital Holdings. So we're a U.S. company focused on the U.S., investing across different states in the U.S. Right now we're in 4 different states. We're in Vermont, we're in New Mexico, Colorado, and Massachusetts. We've taken a slightly different take on the approach to the U.S. We first listed in Canada. We're a company that's about 2.5 years old. We listed in Canada about 6 months ago. As Scott made the point, there has been a ton of activity in Canada in the public markets. We have been a leader in the Canadian markets in terms of raising capital. To date, we've raised over $55 million Canadian. That's about $40-ish million US. I think for any U.S. cannabis company, we've raised more money than anyone else. We've deployed of that money, we've deployed almost $20 million of it. We have some core assets in those 4 states, and we're looking to continue to plant the flag across the U.S. We're also listed in the U.S., but we've really tried to take the focus of capturing the attention of the Canadian investor who is looking for additional exposure into the U.S. There's a lot of ways to play Canada. There's very few ways to play the U.S., and we're sort of at the forefront of that.
Hi, I'm Todd Davis. I'm the CEO of Endexx Corporation. We were actually the 8th public company to enter into the medical marijuana space or the marijuana industry in general. It was really difficult to make a decision how to come into the industry, so we came at it from a compliance standpoint by offering a seed-to-sale tracking system and pharmaceutical grade and vault-level security dispensing platforms. Way too early. You know, we could not penetrate the market. We were there really early. There wasn't a state regulatory body ready for what we had to offer. So we've had to diversify into the industry and be more of just a single niche product. Our other division is a division that does CBD molecular infused products. We pull it from the industrial hemp plant rather than marijuana, just because of some of the legal concerns we have of touching marijuana and being a publicly traded company. Going back to his S1 and getting through, it's remarkable because it's paradoxical to what the federal government should be doing to moderate or regulate this industry. They're not. So at the state level, we're fine, but at the federal level, we have a lot of concerns.
My name is Tim Keogh. I am the CEO and president of American Inc. We are a publicly traded entity based in Denver, Colorado. We set out to address the massive infrastructure needs for the regulated cannabis industry. So we are an ag tech company that is designing and developing next generation cannabis cultivation and processing facilities in regulated markets. Our flagship project that we've been working on is a 52-acre parcel of land in Massachusetts that we've master planned for 1 million square feet of cultivation and processing infrastructure that will be built in phases to support the Massachusetts market. But it's that technology and that system that will be moving with us into new markets as regulations roll out and we adopt more of a national footprint.
Thank you, guys. So at the conferences that Viridian holds, we just had one last Friday at the John Jay School of Criminal Justice, which is an interesting place for a cannabis conference. I always ask the CEOs on stage, why and how did you get into the cannabis industry? And the primary risk for the investors we represent is a reputational risk. The business opportunity, I think, is quite clear. But I'll start with you, Derek. Why are you here? What kind of challenges did you experience coming in? And what are some of the lessons you've kind of learned, a few years post?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was, I worked on Wall Street for a long time, about a decade, and my whole career on Wall Street, starting in say, 99, was booms and busts. Not that it's necessarily any different today, but, I just over some time became a little bit disenchanted with that particular industry, and I was looking for other options. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, I don't have a biotech background, I'm not a doctor, I'm not going to, start something like that, but I had some friends that were in the cannabis industry, and I had used cannabis since I was 15 years old. I never really drank. It was a social aspect for me. I broke my neck a bunch of years ago, and really then at that point kind of had that paradigm shift of understanding what the medical value of it was, you know, from a therapeutic standpoint. So, you know, I started to look around in the space, and I just kind of used my finance background and started to kind of run some analytics and, you know, looked at some friends' dispensaries up in Northern California. And I remember the one thing that really struck a chord with me were the revenue per square foot. So if you look at your average retailer like a Target or something like that, you're talking a few $100s, a couple $100s in revenue per square foot. If you graduate up to, say, a higher echelon retailer like a Cartier or something like that, $1,000, $1,100. There's one outlier in the space. Apple Computer, as you can imagine, you know, is anywhere from, say, $3,000 to $3,500 in revenue per square foot for their stores. I was starting to see the numbers coming out of the Bay Area were anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 in revenue per square foot. There was people doing a massive amount of sales in the industry in very small footprints. And so, you know, I started to garner a little bit of interest, and then we made, you know, I kind of made the decision, you know, with my family, and she thought I was nuts at first, but to jump in on the periphery. So we began our entry into the industry, you know, working on the equipment side. I wasn't ready to touch the plant at that point in time, and in 2010 they were still arresting people. We had Melinda Haig in the Department of Justice up in Northern California, and they were putting people in prison, 10-year mandatory minimum sentences and for permitted operators, and it was a different environment than it is today. So, you know, I just kind of made the jump, just not, you know, enjoying what I was doing anymore, and thought I would combine my experiences and build a business here, and with my partner Mike, who comes from the finance world as well. And then we had this crazy idea to take the thing public, and then we had a crazy idea to file an S1 and an S3, and, you know, the rest is, you know, a little bit of a history. But it's been challenging. It's, you know, I got a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, and this I can say hands down has been the most challenging thing that I've ever done in my life, because, you know, it's a little bit different. Well, it's not really a little bit. It's a lot different than operating, you know, a tech company or any other company in any other space. So the little things that an operator takes for granted in any other company, like finding office space, is something that's a headwind for us. You know, for us to move our corporate offices for a publicly traded cannabis company in Newport Beach, California, it took us, what, 9 months to find a new location, and we got told no about a half a dozen times. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but you take something like that and extrapolate that across almost every activity that we do, from finding service providers to whatever. It's not easy, and it takes time, and it takes bandwidth, and it takes extra capital, and it creates a lot of kind of challenges. And the analogy that we frequently use is this industry to us has been like running uphill on ice, and you know, on a relatively steep hill. So, you know, it's been rewarding. It's been, you know, pioneering for us, and that part of it's been extremely interesting. But like I said, it's, you know, there's a lot of people that come in this industry expecting overnight wealth, expecting to make millions overnight, and this industry is just, you know, it's willing to take your money pretty quickly, but it's just not that. And we learned that relatively quickly. So our focus was always to build a strong fundamental business, strong fundamental infrastructure, and as time went on and the risk profiles mitigated, we began to gravitate closer and closer to the plant. And, you know, at some point, and I think it was 2012, we crossed that kind of proverbial green line, really started manufacturing, going after permits and that type of thing. So, you know, like I said, it's been an interesting ride. It's been you know, been nice to be part of this kind of ending, hopefully the ending of the prohibition that takes place. But it certainly wasn't without a lot of deep thought, and, you know, leaving the comfort of a comfy Wall Street job with, you know, every expert you need at an extension away, from legal to compliance, you name it, and jumping into a startup of any magnitude is a challenge in and of itself. Layer on top of that the regulatory, legislative complexities, the legal issues, and all the other things we deal with. It's been a challenge, but it's, you know, it's been very interesting on top of that.
I actually think you were the first public company that owned a licensed dispensary,
yeah,
and gave investors a chance to own a piece of a license.
Yeah, yeah, and we're one of, and I listen, I don't pay a ton of attention to the landscape, but there, you know, there probably aren't that many multi-state operators actually touching the plant and owning the permits and not doing some convoluted consulting agreement. Yeah, we were the first to directly own, operate, cultivate, extract, and retail dispense cannabis.
Yeah, that's cool. Julius?
Sure. I think so many of us have a similar story in terms of there's always that sort of corporate way that you wanted to get into the industry and a personal way. I'll start off with the personal way. I think we've all had that type of experience where there's a family member. In my case, it's my brother-in-law, very young, was sick and with cancer. He was being treated with chemotherapy, and the only thing that was providing relief and sort of keeping his weight maintenance was actually through cannabis. It was something that I think everyone sort of sees and they would have shied away from. But when you start to see the results of it in a lot of ways, you realize that there is a huge advantage that you can't get through some traditional pharma resources. So I think that opens people's minds. And it's kind of a dirty secret in a lot of families that people have found some relief from that. So I think that's an eye-opener that people start to see it, and you realize why it is such a big industry. So that's a little bit on the personal side. On the corporate side, I'd mentioned before that my background, I'm Canadian. I'm still based in Canada, and I had watched the Canadian industry grow up. I had watched all these companies start to go public. Right now in Canada, there's 11, and so of the 250 public companies, there's sort of 11 very legitimate ones listed up in Canada. They've all had a fantastic run over the past couple of years. They're chasing after a $200 million market in 2016, and there's over $5 billion of market cap in Canada focused on that $200 million market. I look at what's happening in the US, and even though I was playing around and investing and helping get some of these Canadian companies off the ground, I think all you have to do is open your eyes and see that the market in the US over that same comparable period is $7 billion. And outside of some of the companies who are on the stage, and there's a few others, there's only a few of us who are tackling that US market right now. And for anyone who's looking for this generational opportunity in order to create wealth, to do something that is absolutely sort of front page newsworthy in terms of watching a massive, massive industry sort of take hold and being able to create sort of one of the largest companies in what's going to be one of the largest sectors out there. It's an opportunity I haven't had in my 20 years on Wall Street and Bay Street in Canada. It just sort of mobilizes and motivates you to get involved with some of it. And when you start sort of digging in a little bit, gentlemen on the panel as well, some of my colleagues, you just start figuring out the resumes and the backgrounds, the entrepreneurial backgrounds of people who are getting involved with this on the finance side, on the regulatory side, and then you find as well some of the passionate people who've been on the operational side. Myself, who's similar to Derek, you've had sort of a nice Wall Street type job, you're wondering about getting your feet wet in this industry. When you look at some of the people who've been running dispensaries and cultivation facilities for 5 or 10 years in very difficult regulatory environments, and they look at us now who are afraid to change our LinkedIn profile about getting into this industry, they're like, you have no idea how difficult it used to be and how easier it's getting with each incremental month. So the rock is rolling downhill. I think it's an amazing future for anyone who's looking at this industry right now, and you speak to some of the veterans out there and they just see that it's a really clear path. There's still going to be some rocks in the road from the regulatory front, but things are getting easier. There's a lot smarter people on the finance side, on the law side, on the regulatory side, all those attendant camp followers who are helping guys like us, whether it's auditors, lawyers, getting us to the next stage.
So when you look at this market, especially 5 years ago, it was massively inefficient. There were opportunities everywhere, so it was really hard to find clear focus on what to come after. I had come from Wall Street also. I had started in 1990 as an investment banker and broker, and I caught 3 major booms. The very first stock I ever bought and recommended was a biotech firm, and I learned biotech. I bought a stock. It was up 10 times its value in the first year, and I was going, wow. The same thing is here in this industry, but it's sustainable. Biotech was not really that sustainable. Big pharma came in and swooped up whatever worked and left a bunch of dead soldiers on the field. There was a lot of failure in it. In the marijuana market, you had people, you had families, you had an institutional setting without institutional representation, a movement of mass proportions that was pushing forward on something that was actually showing evidence of working. Anecdotally, however you want to claim it, there was no research in the United States, but there are molecules in this one plant that can change the quality of life within 1 day. It's not a week. It's not years of being on chronic medication. It changes lives immediately. It improves the quality of life, even if it's the end of days. So as we've all experienced with our own families, we've seen it change the value of somebody's life, right their body's wrongs, and help them live a more healthy lifestyle. The opportunity comes from our wisdom of participating in other industries. If you apply those principles that worked in other industries to an industry that has no principles except for operating in the gray area or in the shadows with a whole bunch of people to believe, you can lead there, you can take the risk, and you can take some of the bullets it takes to get through and make this a successful industry. So for me, it's, anecdotally on a daily basis, we see people getting healthier day in, day out. The testimonial facts behind everything that's going on here is extraordinary. And until you witness it yourself, try it yourself, experience it yourself, you're not going to understand how big this really is. It's not 10% of the population that's going to benefit. It's 90% of the population with all the upside still left in the marketplace. So that's really how I got here.
Yeah, so similar start for me. I had a personal experience with someone close to me that could have benefited from access to cannabis. I was living in Florida at the time. When I moved to New England, I reconnected with some friends that I grew up with who were involved with the medical marijuana program in Rhode Island. By way of background, I was in Florida designing and developing marinas and boatyards, so doing a lot of work, master planning communities, working with residential developers, golf course, hotels, and marinas. So when I walked into a 6,000 square foot indoor warehouse cultivation facility down in Rhode Island that my friend had been building over the last 3 or 4 years, so 2008, 9, and 10, I walked in and from an operational background, from a master planning background, everything that was going on inside of this 6,000 square foot building offended me and offended my, my sensibilities. So that's when I guess I kind of identified some of an opportunity, but I really got involved as an advocate. Massachusetts had a ballot initiative. I said, why don't we organize a team and we'll go step in and kind of participate in this growing, emerging market, but knew that I didn't want to take that 6,000 square foot indoor model and replicate it. I call it kind of the bathtub gin model of production, where during alcohol prohibition, he's growing, he's producing the best bathtub gin. Prohibition falls, he goes out and he rents a 20,000 square foot warehouse, hires all of his friends, fills it full of bathtubs, and starts production. It wasn't a path forward. So I knew that the indoor kind of small-scale production model wasn't the answer, but I didn't know what the path forward was. So these were kind of early days. Fortunate enough to connect with the Barton family out of Denver, who had a public company background, who had pulled together this concept of addressing the infrastructure needs. And, we've designed a sustainable, horticulturally driven approach to cultivating and processing cannabis on a large scale that looks a lot like traditional ag, but is driven towards the nuances of cannabis. So that's kind of my path.
Right. So let's get to probably what most investors that are looking at the industry hear in the mainstream, which is Sanjay Gupta from CNN went from virulently against cannabis as a medicine, and now he's a very vocal advocate. The New York Times, the mainstream media is supporting this. 29 legal states medicinally, 8 recreationally. California, Massachusetts came out last November. So the November elections for some was a grand slam. For others, perhaps not, whatever side of the aisle you sit on, but in terms of the industry, it was. So it's all happening at the state level. Just like prohibition unwound at the state level, just like all social change, gay marriage, civil rights, starts at the state level. But now we have the boogeyman, whomever you may consider that, either in the White House or sitting in the Attorney General's seat. So that's a threat to this industry that exists today. It's an illegal drug, Schedule I status at the DEA. So nothing's changed, but something has changed, which is the federal government's perspective of this. So how do you deal with that as a public company that is pretty persistently looking for capital and having to answer to shareholders?
Well, the nice thing about politics is they're political, right? So it's obvious, but it's the reality of the situation. So, we're trying to analyze what's going on, just like everybody is, and it's hard. It's hard to analyze what's going on in the White House with the chaos that's going on there, right? And you've got a guy like Jeff Sessions who's archaic at best with his views on not only cannabis, but just kind of drug law reform in general and incarceration. It's a very kind of old mentality that data has proven historically just doesn't work. But there's a lot of other thought leaders that surround the administration. Love them or hate them, there just are. I mean, Roger Stone, who's a very, very volatile individual, as we all know, chastised Sessions publicly the other day. You got guys like Peter Thiel, who are thought leaders in the space, who are big investors in the space that surround the president. Dana Rohrabacher, who's a Republican congressman who's conservative on a bunch of issues, but cannabis is not one of them, is meeting with Trump on Tuesday. Rand Paul, another one. So this is the first time in history we've really had this measure of bipartisan support. And it isn't just, again, the Democrats. We've got a lot of these kind of libertarian-minded Republicans that are stepping up in support who may not care about cannabis, but they certainly care what Scott was talking about, states' rights. You can't be states' rights on gay marriage, you can't be states' rights on this, and that, and then decide to draw a line when it comes to, say, recreational cannabis. And I think what they're going to find out, if they haven't found it out from some of the pushback that came under the commentary, is there's a re-election risk associated with this industry. And I can't remember what the exact age group, but it was something with a 30-year-old to 40-something-year-old. It was 71% of that demographic supports it. It's over 50% of the broad constituent base across the country that support it. And that paradigm is changing on a month-by-month basis. We're starting to get that accelerated momentum from an acceptance standpoint. And a lot of that has to do with the original states like Colorado that organized and regulated earlier, because a guy like Jeff Sessions or anybody could stand up in front of a crowd and say, if you legalize, your kids are going to die, and they're going to get addicted to heroin, and we're going to have higher crime, and there wasn't any way to combat that. But now we have quantifiable data coming out of these markets that are supporting, that the social aspects that are associated with this are not only not what they thought they were, a lot of them are the opposite. Reduction in opiate abuse, less teen use, those types of kind of things that come out of a very well-regulated environment. We're starting to see the kind of the political, or not the political, but the social repercussions of that. So, they can avoid data for a period of time, but when the constituent base starts to ask questions, that's going to cause a re-election risk problem for them. And we're even seeing that on some of the real conservative right who's saying, hey, this is God's plan. How can you say that this doesn't have medicinal value associated? So for us, medicinal is the foot in the door to get that broader acceptance. But then it puts them in kind of, in my opinion, in our opinion, a bit of a checkmate. Because again, how can they say states' rights for medical is okay, but not necessarily for adult use? And so much of the legislation that's passed around the country has passed through voter initiative, through ballot measures and those types of things. I mean, that's the epitome of democracy. And even some of the legislative ones that originated from our regulators were originated because there was pressure that was put on from a ballot initiative. So to me, I think there's a significant amount of re-election risk around this. I think the social aspects for the tax and regulation are going to be too powerful of a statement. They're talking about coal mining, and the job creation with this industry alone is astronomical. I mean, in the last 2 years, we've grown from 15 employees to 200. We've taken the company from $500,000 in revenue in 2012 to 25 last year, and somewhere between 38 and 40 this year. The economics associated with this, to me, are far too significant for them to avoid it. It doesn't mean they're not going to make things difficult for us, but we've worked in a hostile environment. Some of the newer companies aren't necessarily used to that, but again, in 2010, 11, 12, and 13, in California were relatively hostile. I think we've made a lot of progress since then. So I'm not necessarily worried about one individual, even though he's a very powerful individual and a very powerful position, has to say, because I think the repercussions from an activist standpoint, a constituent standpoint, and even, like I said, the libertarian-minded Republicans who care about states' rights, is going to come back to bite them, and probably relatively hard. And that's from our perch. And so we're pushing forward as if nothing's changed over the last few years. And we actually have a bit of an appreciation for this dichotomy between state and federal law, because to us, if it didn't exist, none of us may be sitting here. It might be big pharma, big tobacco, big alcohol, whoever. It's going to be somebody that would have been a lot more capitalized than us. So thank God we have an environment where we can build our brands, build our business, capitalize our company ahead of something like that taking place.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that, I obviously agree with everything that Derek said. I think one of the key things that we look at in an environment like this is that it's business as usual. Our investors know that this is an industry that has more risk than the typical industry. They're looking to us to have business as usual, to stick to our business plan, to make sure we have lots of cash on our balance sheet and take advantage of the market dynamics. If you read the tea leaves, you've seen some of the comments from Sessions around medical states. That is where we're focused right now. We're a little bit diversified in 4 states right now, but we're trying to figure out where's the right spots for us to deploy our capital. And I think investors want to see companies like ours and ourselves not worried about some of these bigger risks out there, but still being judicious about the way that they're proceeding. We're preserving capital, we're deploying it in the right way, we're making sure investors know that we're taking the right steps working with the right partners and the right lawyers to make sure we set up the right structures to proceed, because I think right now, given this sort of dichotomy between the federal and the state level, has created this massive competitive advantage for anyone who wants to jump into the industry. I don't see ourselves on the leading edge, it's sort of more on the bleeding edge, similar to everyone who's in this room right now. If this was a regular way industry, there would be sort of mass audiences trying to figure out how to get in there. It's not for the faint of heart right now, but for guys who've set up the right structure and take it seriously, the regulatory ways to enter in a sector, I think that there's huge rewards for guys who are sticking to the plan and sticking to business as usual.
Would you agree that the activity that we're seeing in Canada from a market cap and capitalization standpoint, the fully bought deals, the close to market deals, is to me a kind of a precursor of what I think is going to eventually happen here if we can get our heads out of our asses and figure out there's huge economics involved with this. I mean, investment banks can collect fees. I mean, it's a huge, huge potential catalyst, but I got to believe it's a great example.
And to add to the point, being a Canadian, and I want to agree with that to a certain extent, but you also have to look at the fact that we have a massive country with the same amount of people that you could fit in California.
Yeah.
So if you think that the Canadian example is a good example, you've got to put the Canadian example on supercharged steroids, where you have seen the massive amount of excitement around that market, around the retail investor, around the institutional investor, watching this massive tidal wave and this sluice opening as all these states come online. And that, you're just getting a window to what's happened in the Canadian market, supercharge that and sort of continue to multiply it, and that is what's going to be happening in Canada. I see what's happening in Canada. We're probably in the second inning. There's been 2 bull runs that have happened in Canada. In terms of the momentum of U.S. stocks, the fat lady has barely started to sing down here. So it's, I think it's a really exciting future for what's going to go on.
I would just add that, you know, I don't buy all the media BS. Media is trying to sell media. They're trying to sell stories. So when you hear Jeff Sessions talk, or you hear Sanjay Gupta talk, all of our stocks go up and down based on who's ever the talking head of the day and whatever the media is pointing at for the exciting story. There are checks and balances. You have Congress that has written certain provisions for us to operate legally under a specific bill. You have states that are regulating and setting up certain parameters. You have politicians who are politicians, which is the art of lying, but they're trying to sway opinion one direction or another. That's ultimately what they're all trying to do. The risk of not being elected again is real. You know, we have 60 to 65% of the U.S. population has some type of legal access to this market now, and they're participating. Not all of them, but they are participating in smaller percentages, but it's increasing every single quarter, every single year. When we first started talking about this 4 or 5 years ago, the educational curve in a room like this was there might be 3 people in here that knew what we were talking about. And now it's growing. And as we educate, part of our job is educating the market, educating our marketplace, and evaluating whether or not are we getting positive feedback. If all the doors were being slammed in our face from our customers, we would not pursue this. If it was just politicians, we can handle that. We can take some of that risk. Our investors identify that this is their opportunity. They're willing to take a risk for above average returns, and they're looking for extraordinary returns. When Derek's stock goes up, mine goes up. When his goes down, mine goes down, and we have nothing to do with each other. We're part of an industry. And as that movement gets stronger and stronger, this tide, it does lift all boats, even some of the bad actors. So from a due diligence standpoint, you have to know who you're investing in. You have to know who you're getting involved with. For all the 300 companies that are out there, there might be 50 high-quality companies. It's like that in every boom cycle. Biotech was like that. Internet technology was like that. Y2K was like that. You know, when internet died, Y2K, it was fear, it was greed. All these things sell in these markets, and we have both here. We're fearful and greedy at the same time, not in the aspect of the capitalism side, but we know that we can change a market. We can be part of building something that did not exist 5 years ago, even though California has been legal for 20 years. So the opportunity is unique. I think the government, you know, I think Congress has to get this right. They have to give some guidelines to the FDA. They have to give some guidelines to the DEA. The DEA, in my opinion, they're just the cops. They don't make the law. They prosecute the law. They've been told not to prosecute the law at the state level. So I don't lose sleep at night thinking that Jeff Sessions is going to say something and change that provision. Congress has to do that. They have to get this right. And the people have spoken, in my opinion, with this last election, and it'll be pushed over a tipping point at the 2-year cycle that I don't think is going to stop.
A lot of these are swing states, right?
They are swing states. Arizona, you know, I'm from Arizona. We missed the go and recreation vote by 2%. You know, some of the metrics behind that is the really conservative parties came out in hordes to vote for Trump. For whatever reason, they voted for Trump. Some of those, in what I would call religious groups, affected a vote enough to not pass. Mid-cycle, it'll pass. You won't have the same turnout voter-wise. LA County lost vote because they did a mid-cycle referendum and it lost because no one showed up to vote. So we have checks and balances politically, economically, everything is going along. As long as you have sustainability and the ability to raise capital, you can survive. If you stick your neck out too far, if you go too toxic on your money, you're going to be out of business. So it's a reason to do your own due diligence.
Let's get off this one. We think this one.
Okay. So I think it's interesting. One of my clients hired 2 market research companies to identify who the true cannabis user is. And 2 things came out of it. The fastest growing demographic, you know this, are 50 and 60-year-old consumers. Probably kids are out of the house and so they have the free backyard to go do what they want to do. But the fastest growing consumer is probably what's represented among some of the people here. The average consumer is not the 18-year-old kid in college. What does that say? Time's up. Time's up. It's a 42-year-old lawyer was the average demographic for these 2 market research firms. 42-year-old lawyer.
They crossed over and met on that average?
This is the center point.
Interesting.
2 kids, travels, likes good wine, likes good food, has a $175,000 annual salary. I mean, this is not, you know, the corner of Haight and Ashbury in San Francisco anymore.
It was probably the SEC, the guy, your lawyer who was fighting through the SEC, that 42-year-old lawyer.
That guy right there?
Yeah, exactly. He needed to self-medicate after going through the SEC.
To work it with me?
So let's end with this because there's investors in the room, at least there were. What's it like to go after money in the industry? What's it like to try to get a valuation and a normal structure in raising capital?
Listen, our first financing was a 40% discount to market with an unbelievable amount of warrant coverage. Fast forward to today, because we executed with it on the early stages, so it didn't become tox. That was perfect what you said. And we grew into it. So I mean, the stuff we do now, still convertible ventures for the most part, but we got the S3 effective, so we're a little bit different. We've got a kitchen sink shelf to pull from. So we've got something similar to an ATM that's a few percent discount to market overall, but we do stuff that's about a 15% discount to market now. 0 warrant coverage. We've raised, I want to say probably over 45 million bucks, somewhere in that ballpark, and it gets healthier all the time. It kills me to watch these Canadian financings, and we should be having that stuff. The fully underwritten deals here for some of these companies that are breakout companies.
When did you guys, I don't know if you know what Derek is talking about, the majority of the deals we've seen lately in Canada, 6 months, are bought deals.
Yeah.
I don't remember a bought deal in the U.S.
There hasn't been
decades.
No,
I can't remember one.
Yeah.
And they're fully underwritten. It's unbelievable.
It's crazy.
What's it like? Well, you're up in Canada. So.
No,
All right, I'm passing over you.
Yeah, the anomalies in Canada. We say sorry. We put "yous" in all of our words, and we like bought deals. But it has been a long-standing feature of the Canadian market. The Canadians have always wanted to be competitive with Americans on a variety of fronts, as well as financings, and it's tough for a lot of the Canadian brokerages to compete with guys like Bank of America and Merrill Lynch and other guys who are north of the border. So it's been a long-standing feature of sort of Canadian brokerages to put together a bought deal, which is basically not just an underwritten deal, but it's even more ironclad around it. We've been able, since being public in the last 6 months, we've been able to do 2 of them. It adds a lot of security to investors. We were lucky enough in our first deal, we had 19 institutional investors, a lot of high net worth investors that have come in. We've been very successful with raising capital, and we've been successful in deploying it. And that's what investors want to see. They don't want to write a blank check into a company with a bunch of suits who want to jump into the cannabis space. They want to figure out, do you have the right structure? Are you in states where there's a lot of growth, and are you building sort of a lasting sort of franchise in that state. We're on the cultivation side, the dispensary side, the processing side, and investors also want to get the sense of there's not a single point of risk or a single point of failure. I think anyone looks at the regulatory environment, being in just one state and going deep is probably not the right way to go in this regulatory context. They want to see you diversified. That's helped with our success as well. It also helps for a U.S. company to have staff in Canada. There's always a neck to choke that's only a couple blocks away compared to always looking just south of the border. So,
I like that analogy.
All right.
I think we're yeah.
We'll take any questions offline.
ETF that opens tomorrow.
Thank you.